Donald Trump is a terrible negotiator. I mean, that's nothing to be ashamed of. Most of us are terrible negotiators. But Mr. Trump has built much of his reputation, at least amongst his supporters, on the basis that he truly understands the art of the deal. In this video, I hope to use Trump as an example of poor negotiation strategies, and then illustrate some better ones that Trump and you the viewer could use in your daily lives. For many of us, our first instinct when negotiating is what is called arguing over positions, and Trump is no different here. How this works is that each party takes a position. For example, Party A says, "Hey, I'd like to buy this mug for €2. And then Party B replies, "My girlfriend got me this mug, I can't part with it for less than €20. From here, each party will attempt to justify its position, while progressively compromising in order to reach a deal. Or perhaps an impasse will be eventually reached, at which point no deal can be made. Yeah, but it's got a mark on it, so €6? But come on, this is a one-of-a-kind design. She designed it specially. €16. And on it goes. For many of you, this is just what negotiation is. No other way can be conceived. Mr. Trump is certainly in this boat. However, this method of negotiating is unideal, and here's why. Negotiators bargaining over positions will lock themselves into those positions. The negotiators will keep trying to convince the other negotiator that they cannot abandon their positions, and that makes it harder and harder to do so. They also start to identify with their positions. Abandoning them means losing face. This is especially a problem for Mr. Trump, who, whatever else he is obsessed with his own ego. Furthermore, the positions become stand-ins for the actual interests of the parties, and in doing so, the interests themselves get lost and are very poorly served. If an agreement does get made, it's made through splitting the difference between two contradictory positions, rather than trying to forge a mutually agreeable solution. And hence, the deal will be unsatisfactory to both sides. Let's take Trump and the border wall as an example of this. Trump's underlying interest, rightly or wrongly, is to make it harder for migrants to illegally enter the USA from Mexico. And that is an interest that I will take at face value for the purpose of this example. However, the position he's taken is that there must be a border wall between the two sovereign states. Democrats in Congress, whose support Trump relies on in order to get funding through the wall through conventional means, decided that it would be an ineffectual solution to the problem and politically toxic for them to agree to. Ultimately, they see it as nothing more than a symbol of nationalistic isolationism. However, Trump has spent years making the border wall a signature part of his political program. To abandon it would mean taking a hit on his ego, and he couldn't change his mind on its effectiveness after years of telling his supporters how it would solve the issue. Personally and politically, Trump now can't abandon the border wall. Meanwhile, Democrats also can't abandon their opposition to it for similar reasons. By getting lost in the positions, the underlying interest of reducing unlawful Mexican immigration has been lost and very poorly served. Another failure of positional bargaining is that the parties tend to start with extreme positions in order to ensure that the eventual compromise is to their favour. Parties who initially state a reasonable solution are at a disadvantage here, and this is obviously highly inefficient. Parties should be able to make reasonable solutions, reasonable proposals from the beginning. And the incentivization of taking initial extreme positions only ensures that making a deal takes more and more time. Because of all of these threats, stonewalling and walkouts that this also incentivizes, it actually makes it harder for a deal to eventually be made. Lastly, this form of negotiation becomes a battle between the participants. Such an approach engenders distrust and resentment. This makes it harder to negotiate in future. If you want an ongoing relationship, you are going to need a form of negotiation that allows the parties to like each other, or at least not hate each other. This is perhaps Trump's biggest flaw. The international community will smile and wave with him, but it's clear that they utterly despise him. This is normal for your domestic political opponents, although still unideal, but it's uniquely Trumpian on the world stage, at least for a US president with US allies. The ongoing threats of tariffs, of pulling out of alliances, etc., 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 make him fundamentally distrusted. No one wants to do Trump favours, because they know he will not pay them back. And ultimately, this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. It ensures that the only way Trump can get things done is through the further use of threats and intimidation. Now, this can work to his favour when there is a huge power differential. We all saw how quickly Mexico rolled over when Trump threatened them with tariffs and then agreed to attempt to reduce unlawful immigration. But with parties with which the US is on a more equal footing, such as China or the EU as a whole, this strategy just does not work. And this is terrible, as in geopolitics, your relationship is often more important than the deal you're trying to work out in that particular instance. With whom you have good relations is everything on the world stage. As a side note, positional bargaining becomes harder the more parties there are, which is why it is generally frowned upon within the European Union, where multilateral negotiations are the norm. Where it is used, it tends to lead to the formation of blocs that can be very hard to deal with. This is why Trump always likes to isolate individual nations, or at least attempts to. For example, he attempted to strike a trade deal with Germany individually, which is impossible because the European Union is a customs union, and he had to be told that by the German delegation. This is illustrative of how Trump cannot deal with multilateralism on the world stage due to how committed he is to this form of negotiation. This is also something that George W. Bush had problems with, and this led to his coalition of the willing that isolated important US allies like Germany and France. Obama attempted to correct this, but in some instances arguably went too far the other way. For example, in Libya, where Obama left NATO without leadership. Here, most NATO members assumed that the US would take leadership on Libya, but Obama insisted that NATO would take leadership, despite NATO being an alliance rather than some independent entity that could take leadership. Now, a lot of people may be thinking, that's just how you negotiate. The alternative to playing hardball is being walked all over. This alludes to the softer form of positional bargaining, in which the relationship is prioritised over the deal being made. Compromises are generally more easily made using this approach. However, this too is an unideal way of negotiating. It's still bargaining over positions, with many of the same flaws as the harder approach. Furthermore, a soft negotiator is liable to be taken advantage of by a harder one. This isn't the alternative, it's another flawed approach. So what is? The Harvard Negotiation Project identified a different approach to negotiation, one that makes more agreeable deals more efficiently without damaging the relationship between the parties. They called it principled negotiation, and at its most basic, it requires the following 4 things. Number 1, separate people from problem. Prevent ego from being an issue by emphasizing that the parties are working together to combat the problem, rather than combating each other. Number 2, focus on interests and not positions. Try to understand the underlying interests behind the stated positions, and deal with them rather than getting lost in the weeds of positional bargaining. You might even find that your interests are more closely aligned than you would have assumed. Number 3, come up with various different possible solutions. Basically, you have to brainstorm with the other party, or parties, to devise creative solutions to the problem and give you lots and lots of options. And number 4, ensure that the eventual agreement is based on an objective standard. Mutually agree on an objective standard that can be used to deliberate between various possible solutions. This could be a third party, such as a judge or an expert. This ensures that stubbornness is not rewarded, and tends to produce more mutually agreeable solutions as neither side is necessarily favoured. This video was based in large part on the book Getting to Yes, Negotiating an Agreement Without Giving In by Fisher and Urey. It's a pretty short book if you'd like to check it out. My other main source was The Expert Negotiator by Sana, and my Trumpian examples can presumably be found through a quick Google search if you'd like to learn more about his various escapades. I also relied primarily on two articles when it came to my Bush and Obama tangent. The first is Towards a Post-American Alliance, NATO Burden Sharing After Libya by Hallams and Schreer, and the second was European Foreign Policy and American Primacy by Clark, no relation. And I will reference all of those sources down in the doobly-doo.